thank you very much for the invitation here, and I very much enjoyed the last two speakers as well. Many themes that I seem to be addressing on many of the conversations I have. And also to Sheikh Hussein, who I just met personally in Iran. Somebody had watched and admired for many years, and I was getting into the elevator, and lo and behold, there he was in the elevator. I didn't even know he was going to be there. And I made a point of spending a reasonable amount of time with him and getting to know him. And what I really found fascinating about meeting him is how he's coming at it from a very Islamic perspective, of course, and I'm coming at it from a very different Western perspective. And yet these two things really mesh quite amazingly. We find so much understanding that is developed, yet coming from really very, very different, diverse perspectives. And I love that, because I think that's exactly the case. We, in this world, which is literally upside down, literally, I mean, you know, black is white, white is black, you know, justice is injustice, you know, everything is upside down. And yet, and this is why, rather, we find that our differences are a source of resentment, of bitterness, and oftentimes manifesting in the form of violence in this upside down world of ours. If the world were right side up, rather than us actually fighting each other over these differences, we'd be celebrating these differences. This is part of the beauty of life. You mentioned it as well, I believe. You know, did God want all of us to subscribe to the same exact kind of ideology? Is that why he gave us free will, so that we could all come here and freely will to be pretty much believing in exactly the same sort of ideology? I don't believe so. I don't believe so at all. And I also don't believe that we have to have the same ideology in order to treat each other as we are. We are brothers and sisters, whether we like it or not. Many of my brothers and sisters are acting in a way which is completely and totally unacceptable, and of course we need to do something about that. But at the same time, they are a brother or sister. And actually, I can understand why people are acting the way they do, because I come from America. And in America, we are indoctrinated into a way of seeing the world that is extremely powerful. It doesn't have any resemblance to the truth. I mean, the idea that we come from the greatest nation in the world, freedom and democracy and all this sort of stuff is pure nonsense, but it's very, very real. If you grow up in an environment in which all of these illusions are fostered and you are surrounded by people who feel likewise. So it's not so stupid and crazy to understand why, for instance, the Jewish supremacist who subscribes to Talmudic sort of ideology is a reality in the Jewish, so-called Jewish state of Israel. If I grew up there, I'd probably be one of the most vehemently, violently passionate Jewish supremacist Zionist nutcases, and probably with the kind of articulation abilities I've got, I could be a spokesperson like Mark Regev or something like that. You know, if it's totally possible. I'm a huge believer in nurture versus nature. I also certainly subscribe to the ideology and understanding that genetics plays a very important role in who we are, but it is not the most decisive factor, in my opinion. You can have the same genetic traits that you do, but put you in two totally different environments and you will get a very different result. Of course, this isn't so hard and fast, and there's no perfect science to it, but the bottom line is, if I was raised in Israel and I was surrounded by people who also believe that we're chosen by God. In fact, if I was around people with a Talmudic sort of way of seeing the world, you know, the fingernail of a Jew is worth more than all of the goy. The goy, you know, the non-chosen ones can be lied to, they can be raped, they can be killed, they can be exploited every which way. And that's all perfectly fine, and God made that so in many of his writings, according to many of the rabbis who vented their feelings in the Talmud. And you know, hey, you create your own reality. That's the bottom line, no matter how ridiculous it is. So I grew up in the idea that America was the greatest in the world, and I ultimately joined the Marine Corps. I came from a white, middle-class, suburban environment, very charmed existence compared to what many people have to deal with in this world. And there were things that happened to me along the way that I look back at now, and I realized how I was being manipulated, and yet I was totally clueless about how it was happening. One example I can give of that is when they bused us comparatively rich white kids to the poor black neighborhood once a week. They called it integration. So us relatively rich white kids went to the poor black neighborhood, And I was always a bit cantankerous and always kind of managed to find my way into one altercation or another. And I never liked bullies, for one thing. I didn't like people who tried to intimidate others or myself, and ultimately, you know, that led me into many physical altercations. And when I went to the poor black neighborhood, I ended up finding some, you know, black folk who seemed to have a problem with me, which made me have a problem with them, and, you know, one thing would lead to another. And while I was having a problem with one black kid, next thing I know, I've got a problem with 4 or 5. I'm not fighting just one, I'm fighting several of them. And it pissed me off, to be honest. It really did. It made me angry. And I thought, well, you know, I started to adopt ways of seeing black people which were clearly prejudiced. I was never an out-and-out racist. I never was so lost that I believe every black person is this way or anything like that. But I would recite certain facts, such as, you know, how does such a small minority of the American population contribute to so much of the crime? You know, that's true. I mean, that's true. There's very high crime rates amongst the black population, and if you look at just the surface of it, yeah, it seems to make sense. But what I obviously failed to do was see the root. What is the root of that? Is there a root cause of that? And as with almost every important truth that you can name, there is a root. And unless you understand the root, you're not going to understand what's actually happening. This applies for virtually every aspect of life, if you ask me. And when we get to the root, I return back to the fact that we are all brothers and sisters, whether we like it or not. And this is, for me, a very, very important issue, because one of the things that happens to me invariably, I've been really blessed. I mean, I was invited to the Islamic Awakening Conference in Iran last year. I mean, there was nobody looking like me at that conference at all. I mean, this is like very respected Muslims from around the world, and here I am. And you can see, you know, obviously people noticing, you know, who is this man? And let me tell you kind of how I came to look the way I do, because obviously, you know, I could take off my shirt and I could show you all sorts of things I've put on my body, and I know that many subscribe to an understanding that effectively what I've done is haram, that I've taken what God has given to me and I've marked it in a way that clearly wasn't provided to me. So I understand that way of thinking, but let me explain to you why I look the way I do, and maybe you'll have a deeper understanding and hopefully a respect for it. When I got out of the Marine Corps, without getting into great detail as to what happened to me there, but the bottom line was, while I was in the Marine Corps, I effectively was sort of a whistleblower. I blew the whistle on abuse of power. And the Marine Corps, especially, you know, you'll know this. I mean, the Marine Corps, any American will know this. They have the best commercials. You know, they really make it look fantastic, man. The Marine Corps, especially from a white perspective, it looks fantastic. You know, honor and integrity, and these Marines in their dress blues, and it's just really fantastic marketing. And one of the things that they really foster within the Marine Corps is honor and integrity, you know. And so I basically spoke out on something, and I made an active decision to speak out openly. I could have done it secretly, but I thought that's not the honorable thing to do. I'm going to do the honorable thing, and I'm going to speak out openly. My life was transformed when I reported my superiors for violating their position of power and breaking one of the other tenets of the Marine Corps, which is leadership by example. They were not leading by example. In fact, they were giving a perfect example of how not to act when you're in a position of leadership. Now, I very naively thought that when I did this, that I would be rewarded for my integrity and that I would actually be able to move up the ranks. And of course, the exact opposite occurred to me. And I was punished quite severely, especially from a white middle-class suburban, you know, kind of perspective. I was being punished rather severely for having done the right thing. And this was quite traumatic, you know, and it was in a Marine Corps environment on a ship, no less. You know, people can go overboard. I was looking over my shoulder constantly, and then we ended up going to a war which was really more of a slaughter, the Gulf War, the first one in 1991, or at least not the first one, but certainly the one they call the first Gulf War. And I realized that the man in charge of me hated me with a passion. And this man is in charge of me. And in the military, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, in a time of war, if you're given a lawful order and you do not follow that order, literally, according to this day even, the punishment for not obeying a lawful order in a time of war can be death. So here I am, I volunteered to be part of this thing called the Marine Corps, which I thought was all about honor and integrity, and I did the right and honorable thing and was now being punished to the point where I could go into a war situation with the man in charge of me who hated me, who could tell me to go do something, and if I disobeyed it, could literally be executed. All of this was rather traumatic for me, and it really made me reassess everything that I thought I knew, not only about the Marine Corps, but about America as well. And it was that trauma which was the greatest blessing for me. Had it not been that way, maybe I'd still be in the Marine Corps. Maybe I would have killed a whole bunch of dark-skinned people and been considered a real hero for my fight against terror and so on and so forth. It could have gone that way. And for me, this is important to always remember how stupid I was as a person, how easily we can be indoctrinated, fooled, and manipulated, and how many different methods there are that really get us into these very insane perspectives. And that trauma shifted my way of seeing the world to the point that I was now able to digest information that previously there was no way I was going to hear it. And so I did, and I commenced to a course of independent study. And certain books had a huge impact on me. There's a fantastic book called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which just chronicles the lies and the deceit and the horrendous criminal activities that we committed, the genocide against Native Americans or First Nations peoples in America. I never knew any of that stuff, and when I read it, it was just shocking to know that we did that, and we didn't even so much as apologize. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that really transformed me. And it took me back to the days where I was bussed as a young kid and getting into fights with black folk, and I realized, Jesus, man, if I was born black in this country, I'd be a son of a bitch. You would not want to mess with me. And if Whitey came into my neighborhood, I'd kick the living crap out of him if he didn't keep his mouth shut and toe the line. And, I really could understand the rage that black people in America feel, and rightly feel. To this very day, as we see in Ferguson, we see this madness continuing. Unarmed black men being executed in the street, and cops, generally white, but not always, getting off scot-free. That's just normal. That is America. And despite a black president with his lovely, bright, white, shiny teeth and his ability to speak through a teleprompter, nothing really has changed. But even many black people have been fooled into that. I'm sure, again, you'll testify to that. It's very amazing how easily manipulated we are. And yet, what I see, and I've been a rather astute observer over the last, really, I can safely say, 15, 18 years, I started to have the capacity to think for myself. And while I continue to learn and grow, and will continue to learn and grow, however long I'm able to live this mortal life, I have been watching rather astutely. And it's been pretty amazing watching just how easily people are manipulated. 9/11 was a fantastic example. I mean, I lived in Hawaii at that time. Hawaii is a stolen nation. I could and should give more talks about Hawaii, but the bottom line is Hawaii is not the 50th state. It was stolen by America. It was a sovereign nation, and it had treaties with nations around the world, including England, and it even has the Union Jack on its flag to this day because it was a protectorate of Great Britain. So I lived in Hawaii. I did renounce my U.S. citizenship, as was mentioned earlier, in March of 2001. And I returned to Hawaii, and all of my renunciation papers made clear that while you continue to exert control in Hawaii, you are a de facto power. Hawaii still remains a nation. Its government is in suspension, and I basically laid out all the reasons why I can return to Hawaii. So I did, and I was already a target on many different levels. But when 9/11 happened, that was sort of the deal breaker for me, where I realized I've really got to get out of Dodge now. I mean, there's just, I knew that it was some sort of a false flag. I didn't know how exactly, but I knew enough to know that this was yet another manipulation, and clearly, the official story, which has morphed and evolved over time from the beginning, was totally ridiculous. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. An insult to our intelligence, really, but most people apparently seem to buy that. And I was in America and surrounded by people who believed it, and I knew I could not keep my mouth shut. So it was only going to be a matter of time before drugs were found in my house or maybe explosives, and that'd be it. I'd be locked away and you'd never have heard of me, and that'd be end of story. I lived in paradise. I had my own scuba diving business, whale watching, my own boat, my own compressor, my own retail shop, people working for me, doing work in the community. What I loved, my first love, was the sea. I decided what my job was, and I created something that most would kill for, and I left that 2 months after 9/11, knowing full well that if I stayed, I'd lose not only all that, but probably my freedom, and no one would care except for my family, and that would be it. So I left and sought political asylum in Holland and literally lived in a refugee camp. I met people from around the world who all wondered, what the hell is this guy doing here? I want your passport. And, I had to try and explain as best I could. Well, they say it's a free country, but, ask the 2 million plus who were rotting away in prisons, many of them black, disproportionately so, the ones executed, the anal gang rape that's going on in U.S. prisons every day, which qualifies as torture for me, and ultimately a million other things that are done at par for the course in America, which makes clear that the illusion may be very powerful and strong, but the reality does not resemble the illusion. And so I've been watching and watching and watching, and 9/11 was just an incredible mind control event. It was apparent to me then, as it is today, that people are literally mind controlled, that they're not actually thinking for themselves. Most of us are simply regurgitating trivial pursuit questions on command, and that's exactly what they do in school. It's not about educating, come on. It's completely about indoctrination, and a lot of it is very nuanced and clever, but some of it is rather overt and obvious, but even that we apparently can't see. And so I've been watching from 9/11, which was the peak of insanity and stupidity and just, non-thinking reality for human beings. And then this, of course, war on terror, this incredible war. How is it possible? How is it possible exactly that anyone would have bought from day one that the nation which has bombed and invaded and occupied and terrorized more people than anyone, hands down, who even comes close to America in terms of terrorizing, creating refugees, creating orphans, mass murder, weapons of mass destruction, cluster bombs, depleted uranium, white phosphorus, Agent Orange. Who in the hell is terrorizing more people on this planet than my birth nation? And yet this nation is going to lead the so-called war on terror? I don't understand how anybody bought that from the beginning. It just seems crazy that anybody would have bought that. But I guess for me, that's one of the strongest arguments I've got for mind control, because clearly people cannot be thinking straight if they could buy that. And then we took it one step further in 2003, when quite a few people, despite the largest protests in the history of the world, quite a few people bought into the whole Saddam and weapons of mass destruction in 45 minutes. And so, wait a second. The nation that is producing more weapons of mass destruction than any nation on the planet, that is using them, distributing them, and basically creating the context to use them, is going to fight another nation because of the alleged possession of weapons of mass destruction. How is it possible that people would for a second even think to allow that? And keep in mind, there were, and I understand indoctrination, I understand propaganda, there was a considerable amount of people that bought that. A considerable amount. Many of us didn't, but many did. And so that was, the invasion of Iraq. We've seen, how things have morphed and evolved and nuanced. The BBC wasn't what it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it had such a legitimacy, an air of authenticity, of real credibility. And the things that it could get away with 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you were watching, and I have been watching, is very different. What it's saying today is very, very different from what it was saying 10 years ago. It's evolved because the manipulators, the planners, understand very well that you can only push it too far. If you lived in the Soviet Union and were watching the propaganda apparatus of the Soviet Union, you knew it was propaganda. You didn't fool yourself into thinking, that's real news. Come on, it's pure propaganda. But in the West, we have become so duped that we have come to believe, or at least have believed for a long time, that the media is free and that they express their independent views free of any manipulation or coercion from the state. And I mean, it's just beggars belief that anybody buys that sort of stuff. But the fact is that people have. And the BBC has had to change as have all the mainstream media. I mean, you still look at examples like Fox News in America, which is like, I kind of like it. I mean, it's good entertainment if it weren't so destructive. But I mean, you know, it's an alternate reality. But so is the BBC. It's just a little more intelligent. That's all. And in fact, I find the more intelligent, nuanced propaganda to be far more damaging than Fox News. I mean, you really have to be seriously compromised mentally to believe that this is actual reality. And I know people in the U.S. like that. You know, I know more than one. But what we see is that, especially with one single thing, the internet, that despite the fact that the growth is slower than many of us would like, there are more and more people who are using this freedom to actually access information, which, keep in mind, has always been controlled very tightly. I mean, when you had printing presses and when you had the radio and you had television, all of those things were tightly controlled, and only those with a huge amount of resources really had the ability to use those formats to be able to pass on information. The internet was a total game changer. Although it's full of nonsense and it's also full of things that are very much intended to destroy the fabric of society, pornography being an excellent example, but also many other things that they're there and they're destructive, and we should not ignore the reality and the damage that these things cause. But still, in my opinion, it's greatly overshadowed by the ability to use this resource as a means of developing an understanding, of seeking the truth. And if you do have any critical thinking skills, you can use those skills to be able to look into different subjects, and you can get to the root. You can get to the truth. I've been able to do it on many different levels, and I know many other people are. And what this has done has created an evolution, an advancement in human understanding, and basically it is now we're in a period where it is evolving so fast that the powers that be are really, in all honesty, if you ask me, they're wetting their pants. You know, they're deeply concerned, despite the fact that the powers that be own all of the major institutions, literally. So when I talk about the powers that be, people will get wrapped into all sorts of different arguments, and I think this is really yet another manipulation. Even those that seem to be seeking understanding of how the world functions will find ways to argue about stuff which really should be considered the finer details that we can work out later. It's not the priority right now. What I can say for sure is that those who have the most power, at least in terms of what we can physically identify, are clearly those who control the money supply. Money is power. And when you think about it, we're all fighting for the crumbs. You know, we're fighting for scarce resources, while the powers that be have an infinite supply of money. Literally an infinite supply. Imagine that. Think about that. Think about it for a second. Think if you had an infinite, never-ending supply of money. What might you do with that money if you had that? Print money. You could print money, and what would you do with it, though?
Control.
Well, that's what a psychopath would do.
That's what they do.
And that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now me, considering myself one member of a human family, I want to reduce the suffering for all of my brothers and sisters, and I want to make sure that everybody can live a dignified life. The sooner the better. For me, the top priority would be clean drinking water for everyone. You know, despite the fact that we all take it for granted, there are many people out there who don't even have clean drinking water. And when you don't have that, guess what? Things like intellectual advancement and all sorts of other things that we are concerned about don't mean diddly squat. You know, if you ain't got no clean drinking water, you got problems. And so that's sort of number one. You know, number two might be proper food for everyone. You know, everyone has as much food as they need to live a healthy life, and not this processed crap that they pass off as food that's polluting us on so many different levels. And a roof over your head. That might be a good start, but guess what? If I had an infinite supply of money, I could get the wheels moving on that real fast, and probably within a year. Everyone could have what was needed, because we already have existing technology that can take dirty water and make it clean. We don't need big, huge desalination plants and all sorts of stuff. We have the means to be able to solve these problems. And if I had an infinite supply of money, which I'm not endorsing any individual having that power, but if I did, I would damn well use it in a way that would be beneficial. But unfortunately, what we have is a system in which a bunch of psychopaths, a tiny, tiny minority of psychopaths, literally such an infinitesimally small amount of people have an infinite supply of money. And they're using that money to buy the media. They own the media. They own the mainstream media. They buy governments. Look at our governments. Look at the uniformity of our governments. I mean, even right wing, left, well, whatever, man. Come on, man. That's ridiculous, Con. Do you really believe that you have a choice between Labor and Conservative, Democrat, Republican? Please. I mean, really, really. I mean, it's like Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage. It's a joke. They own the courts. They own the police, they own the corporations, the energy companies, they own our politicians, and they own everything of any real value to them when it means it's instrumental in maintaining their system of tyranny. They own it. And they also infiltrate everything that's good. So I've known this, I've experienced it twice, very painfully so, where I've initiated something that had great power and with a relatively small amount of money could have seriously compromised the plans and agenda of the powers that be. But they got inside, they subverted it from within, and they tore it to pieces. And that is a very effective strategy that a lot of people aren't very aware of. I've experienced it so intimately that I'm quite an expert at this point, but I still have not been able to stop it. And the reason why I can't stop it is because these son of a bitches have the ability to outspend you 1,000,000,000 to 1. So how are you going to beat them? I mean, I'm looking for pennies, for crumbs, trying to compete with people who can outspend me that outrageously. And they have ways and means to get in. So I don't care how good your idea is. And even if you have the tightest group of people around you, it's going to be real hard to negate the kind of power that is afforded to those who have an infinite supply of money. So if there is one single thing that we need to do if we want to have any justice in this world, and I mean proper justice, not some, Orwellian defined term. I'm talking about everyone able to live a dignified life with basic needs all taken care of and an ability to spend the kind of time with our families and loved ones that we should all be spending rather than spending most of our lives as a wage slave trying to pay the bills and stay out of debt. We can have that. We can have it much sooner than we think, but we won't have it ever, that is for sure, with this current system which affords so much power to this small group of people. Now, what I see is that certain things are becoming more commonly known, and once information reaches a certain level, even though it's still a minority level, you can't reverse it. And you certainly aren't going to reverse it when people are becoming more and more uncomfortable. Because one of my observations since becoming more aware is that it's amazing how stupid we can be when we're really comfortable. Boy, oh boy, I mean, you talking Harvard graduates, Oxford, Cambridge, boy, these people are incredibly stupid. But they're very comfortable. I mean, the stupidest people you'll ever want to meet are highly educated, university-degreed people. These people are really stupid. A lot of them actually believe the rubbish that they're being taught, and yet we're supposed to look up to them as sources of information, as experts. These are the dumbest people you'd ever want to meet. Some of them are exceptional people, of course. They're not all totally clueless, and a lot of them, the real clever ones, those are the ones that are cherry-picked by the managers of this tyranny, because they know that these people can see and don't care about their role. They are psychopaths. They lack empathy. They don't care about stepping on others. It means nothing to them. They're not human in the sense that we would consider a normal, healthy human being to be. And I defy anyone who says that human beings are inherently selfish and greedy. That's not true. That's a lie. That's an absolute lie. And it's one of the ones meant to foster this cynical point of view that says that we're always going to be like this because there's always going to be people who gravitate to power and so on and so forth. And those people are inherently corrupt. That's not true either. It's not true at all. Actually, it's not that power corrupts, it's that the corrupt seek power, as a good friend of mine said. People of virtue and integrity don't seek power. They naturally will gravitate towards that because people will respect them, and their power will grow from the respect they gain from the people around them. But in this world, which is completely upside down, people like that are subdued, they're punished, they're tortured, they're killed, they're imprisoned. So being an honorable person in this world means invariably that you will be attacked. If you don't understand that principle, then boy, are you in for a shock once you start doing things that are really honorable and getting results. And I feel really blessed for all the attacks against me. I was just recently labeled an anti-Semite by the Anti-Defamation League, which is a great honor for me. I'm very happy to have finally been bestowed the honor. I'm surprised it's taken this long, but apparently they maybe didn't want to give me the free publicity. I don't know what it was, but the Israeli Defense Forces say that I'm, quote, an operative of the Hamas terrorist organization, and that when I was traveling to Gaza in 2010 on the Mavi Marmara that I was going there to form and train a commando unit for Hamas, which is news to me, but hey, you know what? It's a great honor to have such a morally bankrupt, unethical, violent, perverse entity as the Israeli Defense Forces calling me a terrorist, because in this world, that is most definitely a compliment. But it also has its consequence, and I can understand why a lot of people are a little bit fearful of facing the kind of choices that we need to face in order to affect a better world. And I'm of the firm belief that the world is indeed what we make of it. And if a tiny minority of individuals can manage to have wrested away the power from the people to print money in an infinite supply, and we're all willing and accepting this reality and seemingly unaware of its consequences, or somehow supporting it, well then what's worse? If you ask me, I actually have a certain level of respect for these psychopaths, because while they're very inhumane and really quite disgusting in the way they carry about their lives, I don't know that that's worse than the people who have the power, who have been manipulated, whatnot, into giving away that power, are allowing themselves to be used as tools, as pawns, as cannon fodder, because we are. They don't have the power, actually, other than the power that we've given to them. And we can take it back tomorrow, if we want to. But of course, we need to be aware in order to do that. And many of us are not aware, but there is this growing minority that is aware. And the powers that be, they know this, and they're deathly afraid of it. So when you get to the current situation that we're living in, I really, never lose your sense of humor, that's for sure. I mean, if you start delving deep into the rabbit hole and start looking at the dark reality of this world and you lose your sense of humor, man, there's only so much time for you, man. You ain't gonna last much longer, that's for sure. So never lose your sense of humor. And I have to say, I'm looking at this world right now, and boy, oh boy, is it just one comic routine after another. And we're sitting here supposed to listen. Look at this, Dave, look at Cameron. Did you see what he said at the UN recently? What did he say? He said, what was it? The nonviolent conspiracy theorist activists, Iran, and ISIS are all together as the great... Holy crap. How do you get away with saying that sort of thing? I mean, really. And these people, I mean, especially people like Cameron or Obama, I mean, I think these people are so completely morally bankrupt, but also mind-controlled to one level or another, like seriously mind-controlled, that some of them actually believe this stuff. I look at it like, for instance, George Bush Jr. Come on, I love George Bush. I miss him deeply because he forced the American people to really seriously question, do I live in the greatest nation in the world? And if so, how is it possible that this is our representative? Really? That's the greatest nation in the world, is it? Behind him was Dick Cheney. I think Dick Cheney fits into that category of somebody who's clearly, he's connected to the powers, much more so than Bush. He's got a much more direct conduit to the ones who are running the world. He's clever, he knows what he's doing, he's a psychopath, so there's no problem with lying to people and using them. But he is one of those ones who I'd put in the category of, he knows, he's very conscious of what's going on, and he's very happy to play that role. Many of these people don't even know. They're that lost. They're that clueless. But they're all puppets, one way or the other. And they will do exactly as they're ordered to do. And right now, it is so obvious to me, that America in particular is on full self-destruct mode. The puppets have been given full self-destruct orders. And it's just obvious. The policies that America is carrying out right now are so completely unsustainable. It's just accelerating the process of the fall of the empire. And I think people make a huge mistake, especially American people in this case. You make a massive mistake thinking that those who you believe are in charge for one, but that they will also be making decisions based on some sort of kind of loyalty or love for America. First off, they don't have any position of power at all. Do we really believe that Barack Obama and George Bush are sitting there in the Oval Office formulating policy? Come on, man. I mean, seriously. Those that are running the world don't care. They don't care at all about the American people. Are you kidding me? They don't care. They will sacrifice America, and they'll also Israel. I mean, ironically, I consider myself to be one of the best friends the Jewish supremacist, racist, Talmudic, psychopathic elements within Israel are, because the path that you are taking is so clearly totally unsustainable and will be your demise, like sheep being led to slaughter. And unless you recognize the error of your ways and do so rather quickly, they're going to be a real Holocaust, not this fake 6 million gas chamber thing that we've been sold. And I'm not saying Jews weren't killed, tortured, experimented. Of course they were. Yes, they were. Many crimes against them, no doubt about that. But that fake Holocaust ain't nothing compared to the real one that's coming your way unless you see the error of your ways. And this whole superiority complex that you have, God chose you and you can do anything to the rest. Well, while you have the favor of the empire and continue to get cover from all the courts and all the politicians and all of these different experts and whatnot, while that lasts, you can sustain what you're doing, but that is falling apart. Soon the American system of tyranny, with America as the enforcer, with the US dollar as the global reserve currency, the petrodollar system, that is living on borrowed time. And when that goes, you are screwed. Absolutely screwed. And I guess the only option you have is the one which has been discussed in Israel, which is the Samson option. Who here is aware of the Samson option? Okay, yeah, everyone should know about the Samson option, to be honest. The Samson option is an option that has been put forward by many leading thinkers in Israel, and which I'm sure is held by many, but they won't speak about it publicly for obvious reasons. But the Samson option is that by which, if the Jewish state of Israel feels that its existence is threatened, then it will use its very, worst kept secret in the world, nuclear weapons against targets around the world, including Europe, and in fact is willing to exterminate human civilization if its existence is threatened. Now, some may argue that, well, that's just some, it's not the top leaders or whatever. First off, I find that kind of threat to be unacceptable, even if there's even one little tiny ounce of truth to it. And secondly, if we look at the actions of the so-called Jewish state of Israel and the way it's willing to exterminate people, such as recently in Gaza. Look at what just happened in Gaza. This is not the only slaughter. Israel does this regularly, but they managed to kill another 2 grand plus people. They exterminated 92 families, wiped out, gone. 92 families, bye-bye. 500 children. And if you recall, back in 2008, 2009, the Operation Cast Lead, as it was called, where they used white phosphorus and all this sort of stuff, it was Ehud Barak who was the leader at the time. And basically, they stopped after 21 days of just bloodletting and massacre. And while this was happening, Netanyahu and others of the right, but as if there's really a difference between the right and left, I think. Now, the right is just more honest. So, Netanyahu was, saying, listen, if I were the leader, I would finish the job. He actually ran on that, in his last term. That was part of his platform, was that if we have more problems in Gaza with Hamas and all these terrorists, that I will finish the job. And so his popularity ratings at the beginning of this latest slaughter, Operation Protective Edge, were over 80%, very high approval ratings. And those figures dropped and dropped and dropped. And then when the truce was signed by Israel with Hamas, which you got to imagine how that must have felt to this very psychopathic element within Israel that's at the leadership level. When they had to sign a deal with Hamas, basically on their terms, saying, end of the blockade and being the key thing, that was like bowing to your mortal enemy. It must have been a crushing blow for the nation. And it really, really was something that enraged so many people in the Jewish population of Israel that his approval ratings plummeted down below 20%. And the reason why they were so angry with him is because he did not fulfill his campaign promise, which was to finish the job. What do you mean, finish the job? What does that mean exactly? How do you finish the job? Well, finish the job means get rid of them all. And you have the weapons, just go ahead and get rid of them all. Finish the job, then we can actually, go back to business. And that's why the population of Israel is so angry with Netanyahu. Now, a nation like that, which is armed with nuclear weapons, which is backed by the most violent nation of all, my birth nation, with a system of tyrants running the world with an infinite supply of money, who know that human understanding is evolving at a rate which they can't stop, and in fact is only going to accelerate as more and more people become uncomfortable. And believe me, we're all going to get more uncomfortable, because this little fraudulent Ponzi scheme, game that they have going, they can't just make it better. This spending policy, quantitative easing, which is happening here and even more so in the United States, if you haven't been noticing, and I find it hard that anybody wouldn't notice, prices for everything are going up. Are you getting paid more and more to be commensurate with the amount of increases in living costs? Of course you're not. And it's only going to get worse and worse and worse, which means you're going to get more and more uncomfortable. If you don't outright lose your job, it's just going to be harder and harder to even pay the bills. Hell, in this country, I was reading again about all the pensioners who are having to decide between whether they're going to heat the home or eat, literally. And the numbers are astronomical, how many people are actually freezing to death in this country, and America as well, the richest nation in the world, people actually freezing to death, many of whom have worked their entire lives paying taxes and abiding by the system, and now look at you. It's going to get more uncomfortable, and that means human understanding is going to grow even faster. And the powers that be right now are carrying out policies which I think only a blind man could ignore, are intended to foster a third world war. That is the goal. It's not like, well, we hope to avoid it. It's the same exact thing as the invasion of Iraq. They all said, oh, war is a last resort. We don't want that. We won't bomb the infrastructure, blah, 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 blah. I don't know why anybody believed that, but that's what they say. Right now, the powers that be know certain things that are developing within human understanding are a death knell for them and their whole system. They know this. So many of their institutions are crumbling. You look at the mass media as well. Its legitimacy has long since been destroyed or seriously diminished. Their ability to manipulate people has been grossly undermined, especially with the advent of the understanding of false flags. False flags have been used historically very effectively to manipulate people into one war after another. And if people understand that as they do now, just at the level we are right now, every single event that occurs is immediately seized on by millions of people around the world who are dissecting every aspect of it. And if they make one wrong move, as they normally do, all it does is accelerate the understanding that these things are not actually done by the supposed enemy we're fighting, but by our own traitors, by our own elements within, the enemy inside the gate. And this combination of things is what I've known is coming for a long time, and that is that it's coming to a head. And I'm happy for it, because I don't really care about my material existence. Getting back to what you were saying, brother, it's all about material. And this is, the danger of atheism, if you ask me, more than anything else, the idea that it's all about the material, the physical. It's all about what you have here and now, so you got to protect that. Got to look after that. That's all you got, man. And if you lose that, that's it. End of story. Bummer for you. So self-preserve. Look after yourself. You got to step over somebody, no problem, because, hey, that's all you got. That, to me, is the most insidious and dangerous aspect of atheism. And while I'm not a religious person, I am a spiritually aware person. I'm very spiritual. I know that what we have is much deeper than the physical. And right now, what we have is a situation where those who are in power not only want, they need a third world war, because it's probably the only thing that will get us to do the one thing that can maintain their system, and that is fight each other. As long as we're all fighting each other like a bunch of idiots, they'll be sitting up at the top of their pyramid, smoking their cigars, just laughing their asses off. And they've been playing this game a long time, but they know that right now the jig is going to be up, or very soon the jig is going to be up, unless they get a third world war. And just look at the policies from that perspective. Understanding, if you look at the world from the perspective of sanity, of humanity, boy, is it confusing. That's really confusing. But if you look at it from the perspective of a psychopath who has an incredible amount of power and resources, then you will realize why things are playing out the way they are, and it will all make perfect sense. And this is where I see the world right now. It is coming to a head. On many levels, you see that there are definite fractures within the system, definite fractures. Many of the things that they're carrying out are not going according to plan. This whole ISIS thing, I have to give credit to them. They've done it again. They've managed to create another monster which clearly wouldn't exist without us. They're driving around in our Toyota trucks with our M16s and our bullets. They're doing all this stuff, and well, we got to go fight that now, don't we? Rather than just cut off the money supply. This is what we got to do, and they bought some more time with it. I have to, again, give them some credit. It's a pretty good manipulation. If you have an infinite supply of money, this is the kind of stuff you can do. And I still feel, however, just like 9/11, on the back end of this ISIS charade, people are only going to become more aware. And that is only going to embolden them even further. And so it comes to a head. And I sort of, the moment that I'm waiting for now is when the real orders are given to launch a nuke, or to carry out that even bigger false flag, bigger than 9/11, to whip up the anger and get people to support some sort of policy such as a nuclear launch. That for me is going to be sort of the defining moment, if indeed it occurs. And I have both faith and confidence and hope and optimism, and I also have a very healthy dose of reality and pessimism about how it could go. For me, it could go either way. And for me, this is the beautiful thing that God has offered to us, is that free will. But with free will comes the ability to destroy yourself, if that's what you choose to do. And for me, I understand damn well, and it took a while for me to humble myself and understand. Yeah. It took a while for me to understand that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I tried, no matter how intelligent my plan, it just ain't up to me. It ain't up to me at all. In fact, it is up to us. And I accept that many of my brothers and sisters will not do what they need to do for us to take this beautiful blessing that we have and preserve it, protect it, nurture it, cherish it. That's what I think a sane population would do. I feel like I'm sane because I do love this beautiful planet. I love my life. I have a gorgeous family. I'm blessed so many different ways. People can't even hardly imagine the blessings that I've enjoyed in my life. And if I were to have a bullet put in my head tomorrow, no one need cry an extra tear for me. I lived a full life. I wish everyone could enjoy the fruits and the blessings that a person as free and as genuine as I am has lived, because to me that's the key. If you're free of fear, if you are genuine, even, and keep in mind, genuine human beings are genuinely making mistakes, so I have many faults and I've made many mistakes, but I'm genuine and I don't wish ill will towards anyone. If you live your life free of fear, and Islam is a great tool to get beyond fear, and you actually do what is not the right thing for me, but the right thing, the blessings, they come. Boy, do they come. And while I don't necessarily agree with certain aspects of Islam, I respect deeply so many of the tenets that I am honored to have been called a Muslim. And I had a great, one last example, conversation with Sheikh Hussein in Iran, and one of the first things I discussed with him was the idea of what is a Muslim. And he gave me this beautiful story, which I'm sure you probably know, many of you will know, but he told me about how many of the most devout Muslims, who pray 5 times a day and do many of the things that you're called on to do, are very shocked to find out that when they go and meet their Maker and find the final judgment, that they are not Muslims. And conversely, that many of those who never ever called themselves a Muslim or prayed 5 times a day or did any of these things that we would associate with being a Muslim, goes to meet their Maker and are shocked to find out that they're a Muslim, even though they never made that choice. And to me, Islam, more than anything else, is about the way you deal with justice. And a proper Muslim faces justice square on and really has the courage and strength to turn and face it and never back down. That is the ultimate expression of Islam for me. And for those who aren't that strong, you have other means and other ways to be able to confront injustice. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you very, very much. As a non-Muslim, let me reiterate that I am your brother, regardless of what I call myself. And I believe that we should all recognize that fact. And when we act as brothers and sisters, that is the most important thing of all.